Today's daf is daf Chavav. So we'll begin with the Gemara here, 2 lines up before the end of Chafayim and Beis. Tana, we learned in a Brisa. Modiin, which is outside of Yerushalayim, in itself, pa'amim kilafnim and pa'amim kilachutz. Sometimes it has the halacha lekula, and sometimes lechumra. Ketzad, kadar. Those are the manufacturers of pottery utensils. Yotze, if he's leaving the area between Yerushalayim and Modiin, so he's in that shetak between Yerushalayim and Modiin, and he's on his way to Modiin. The chaver is coming from outside of Modiin, v'nichnas, and he's going into Modiin. And they both meet each other in Modiin, kilifnim. Then we could be mekil, and you could buy this utensil from the kadar. And the reason for that is because the kadar was yotze misham, and once he leaves that area, he's not going to find anyone else to buy his kalim from him. So we have to have sort of compassion on him. However, shnehem nichnasim, if this is one of two scenarios, both of them are coming from outside Modiin, and they're entering into Modiin on the way to Yerushalayim, or alternatively, Chavav and Aleph, o shnehem yotzim ilachut. Then, if they're both going out of Yerushalayim, and now they reached Modiin, so they're either entering into Modiin or from outside or from inside. In both cases, kilachutz, and the kadar is not believed to testify about the tahara of his utensils. So when both of them are going in, then the chaver could wait until they both go in from Modiin towards Yerushalayim, and then he could buy from the Kedar. If both of them are going out, then since they met each other while they were bifnim inside the city, and he didn't buy from him, then he's not going to buy from him now as well. Amar Abai says, Afanana mitnina, I could support this from our Mishnah. In the Reisha of the Mishnah, it says, HaKadar, shemocher es hakideros. If this manufacturer of pottery is now selling his wares, v'nichnas lifnim min ha-Modiin, and he comes from Modiin inside towards Yerushalayim, Neman, he's believed to testify about the Tara of his Kederos. And now let's be medayik. The Mishnah says, Abai, time of the reason why he's Neman is dafka bishum de lifnim min Modiin, implying that he's inside Modiin, beyond Modiin, towards Yerushalayim, ha Modiin gufa lo meheman, but in Modiin itself, he would not be believed. But Ema Seifa, let's look at the Seifa of the Mishnah. It says, Yatza, if the Kadar leaves Eino Neman, meaning he left from Modiin, ha b'Modiin gufa, the implication is that in Modiin itself, Neman, he would be believed. And that's against the Reisha that implies that in Modiin itself he would not be believed, because the Mishnah in the Reisha says that he's nichlas lifnim min Modiin, but not in Modiin itself. So how do we reconcile this apparent contradiction between the Reisha and the Seifa, what we call diukim sosrim? Elalav shmamino, the only way of reconciling it is that kad v'kadar yotze v'chaver nichnas. In one case, the kadar is going out and leaving Yerushalayim, entering into Modiin. The chaver is coming from outside Modiin, entering into Modiin. They meet there, and that's where the kadar is neman even in Modiin itself. But kan in the Reisha, that's a case of sheshneim yotzim or shneim nichnasim, and therefore he's only believed lifnimi Modiin, but not in Modiin itself. Shmami no. Tana, we learned in a Brisa, Nemanim Kadarim, again, there are Ami Oretz. and they're believed from Modi'in and Lifnim, that's only Beklei Cheres Hadakin. These are very small. These are very small earthenware receptacles, which we need desperately. The Ole Regel will need them, and we'll need them for Shlomim and so forth and so on. However, if it would be large kalim, large klei cheres, then we would not believe and rely on the testimony of the Kadorim, who are Amei Haaretz. And another condition is that it's Litzorech Hek Kodesh. In other words, we want to put Yayin for Nesachim, Shemen for Menachos into these small Kalim Klei Cheres Dakim. And we may want to cook in them Shlomim, and for that purpose of Kodesh, they were matir, relying on the testimony of the Am Haaretz Kadorim. Omrei Shlokish V'hu. How do you define and classify a Kli Cheres as very small? Sheni Tolim B'Yado Achas. If it's too heavy and he would need to carry it with two hands, that's not called dakin. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Afilu Eina Nitolim B'Yado Achas. Even in a case where they're large, but they're small, but they're large, so that he needs two hands to pick them up. Since that we could use them for bishul karbanos, therefore Chazal were lenient and they relied on the testimony of the Kadar Amoritz. So here we have machlokas between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan about what is considered a Kli Cheres dak. Now we have another machlokas between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. V'yomer Reish Lakish lo shanu ela reikanim. When do we believe and rely on the testimony of the Am Haaretz to the effect that these kalim are tahorim? That's only if they're empty, meaning they have no liquids in them. If they're full of liquids, low. Because we have a principle that the liquids of Am Haaretz are bechezkas tmeim, and therefore those liquids which are tamei will be metame the kli. Because mashkim tmeim are metamim kalim midrabanan. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Afilu meleim. They could be believed on paras hakelim even if they're full with mashkim. V'afilu afikar suso litocho. Karsuso is a like a scarf. Even the scarf of an Am Haaretz, which is bechezkas, what's called tamei medris. There's a tumah d'rabbanon in the case of an Am Haaretz called tumas medris, and this sudar is munach b'toch hakli. And nevertheless, Rabbi Yochanan says the kadar is still believed to testify about the kalim, even though they are maleim, they're full. And even though the sudar of the Am Haaretz is b'chezkas tmei medris. Amar Ravu moder Rabbi Yochanan v'mashkim atzman shein tmei. Rabbi Yochanan is only being mitayr the kalim, but not the mashkim. The mashkim come under the halacha of mashke Am Haaretz b'chezkas tmeim. And then you'll ask yourself, well, wait a minute, if the mashkim are tmeim, then why are the kalim tahorim? The al tisma, and don't raise your eyebrows about the possibility of being metame the mashkim inside the kalim, but not the kalim themselves. Sharei, we find this in a different context with regard to the Mishnah in Masechet Olos about Tumas Mes. And the Gemara had touched upon this earlier in our chapter. Login, which means a kli, begodel beinani, it's an average size kli, mole mashkim, and it's full of liquids. And where did they place this kli? There was a bias with a mess in it, and there was an aliyah, a second floor of the bites. Between the first floor and the second floor, there's a large entryway, like a large window. And that's a petach shebein arubas habayis la'aliyah. And what they did was, they set up a kli cheres that was owned by an Amoretz as a chatzitza bifnei atuma, so that the tuma on the bottom of the house would not go all the way up through the aruba to the aliyah sabayis, because the chatzitza was generated by a kli cheres shel Amoretz. Logim tmeim tumas shiva. Umashkim tahor. The kli itself is tamei, a tumas shiva, but the mashkim inside are tahor. Again, that same paradox where we differentiate between the status of the mashkim and that of the kelim. So the chachamim made a takana that anything that doesn't have tahara b'mikvah, like for example ochlu mashkim, should be spared from the tumah. Therefore, the mashkim b'tocham tahorim, because you cannot be metayr mashkim. Once they become tamei, that's it. Finito. That's irreversible. So even though these mashkim are munachim, where are they located? In a kli, and the kli, let's say, is a kli matechas, and it's tamei. And the reason why the kli is tamei is because it lends itself to tahara b'mikvah. But that kli is not metamei the ochlu mashkim, because the ochlu mashkim do not have tahara b'mikvah. They don't lend themselves to mikvah. And he says here that chachamim tiknu kach mishum sheyadu she'oso amoretz she'oso etzlo tumas mes im chatzitzas kli cheres nemalo shedvarim sheyesh lehem tara b'mikvah tmeim. If you tell him that which has tara is tamei, yishma b'kolein, he'll accept it. It's a gzeira shatzibur yochel lamod. But if we'll tell him that you need tara b'mikvah on something like mochlin umashkim that don't lend themselves to tara b'mikvah, then he's not going to listen to you at all. And therefore we would make you. And this reflects on the statement of Rava that Rabbi Yochanan is molded that the mashkim themselves are tmeim, but the keli itself is nemon to be mitai. And now we get to the Mishnah of Gaboim and Ganovim. I don't know why the Mishnah combines Ganovim and Gaboim. Gaboim, so these are Jewish people who are Amei Oretz, and they are tax collectors for the Melech. And of course, when they enter into the house to collect taxes, then the tax authorities or the government expect the tax collectors to reveal everything in the house that could be taxable. So they went into the house, and they are going to confiscate various objects in the house as a collection of meches, of mas. Let's say a Ganov stole a kli cheres, and now he returns it. He does tshuva. So both the Gaboim and the Ganovim, Ne'emanim, are believed, Lomar, to testify, Lo naganu, we didn't touch the inside of the kli cheres that was in the bias, the kli cheres. Well, the Ganov is believed to say that he didn't touch the inside of the kelim that he stole. And we don't establish a cheskes tum. Now again, all this is because it's inside the kli. Im nagu b'hem bachutz lo nitmu. Why? Because kli cheres eina makabel tuma migabo ela me'avira. The Torah says that a kli cheres can only be kabel tuma from inside and not from an igiyah of tuma on the outside. And that's a sugya in Masechet of Basra Daf Chav. So in any event, as far as using these kalim for kodesh, we're going to rely on the testimony of the Gaboim and the Ganovim that they did not touch the inside of the kli. Lo naganu b'toch kli cheres shahayu b'bayis. But that's only as far as kodesh is concerned. That has nothing to do with truma. You can't put truma into these kli cheres because we don't believe the Gaboim, etc. As far as truma is concerned, we had all the different differentiations between kodesh and truma. Ubishalayim nemanim ala kodesh. The Amioretz are believed in Yerushalayim al taras hakodesh on all kinds of kelim, even on the larger kli cheres. Chutz Yerushalayim, we only believe them on kli cheres dakim, the smaller ones that we discussed earlier. But as far as Yerushalayim is concerned, there the Amioretz are believed even on kli cheres gasim, the large kli cheres. Ubishas regel af al hatruma. When it's regal time, we believe and rely on the testimony of the Amioretz, even as far as truma is concerned. And how much more so as far as chulin? The Gemara asks for a mini. I'm going to ask you from a Mishnah in Taros, in the 7th chapter of Taros. Hagaboyim shenichnasu toch habayis. So the tax collectors entered into the home of the Jew, and they want to take various collaterals and so forth for the mas. Habayis kulo tome. Notice the chazaka is that the Gaboim were memashmesh in these kalim, and therefore the kalim contracted tumah. Our Mishnah seems to imply that in this situation, the Gaboim are believed to say lo nagu, that they didn't have contact with the kalim. Lo kasha, had the ika nachri badayu, had the leka nachri badayu. The Mishnah in Taros that establishes that we don't rely on the testimony of the Gaboim, that's in a case where the Jewish tax collector is accompanied by a guy. Our Mishnah, on the other hand, that establishes that the Gaboim are believed is the leka nachri badayu. There is no accompaniment of a guy. And the Gemara proves this Snan. We learned in that Mishnah in Paris that we quoted before in Perek Zayin, im yesh nachri imahem, if a guy accompanies the Gaboim that went into the house, ne'monim lomar, lo nichnasnu, aval ein ne'monim nomar nichnasnu v'lo naganu. We can trust the Gaboim, the Jewish Gaboim, to say that they didn't enter into the house at all to collect the possessions of the Balabayas. Therefore, all the kalim in that bayis are tahor. But to say, well, yeah, we went in, but we didn't touch any of the kalim, that they're not believed. Why not? And the answer is because they're accompanied by a god. So the Gemara immediately asks the question, what difference does it make? If you're believing the Gaboim, that they didn't touch the kalim, the inside of the kalim in the bayis, so why should they not be believed if they were accompanied by a god? And Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar, they give two answers to this question, very similar answers. There's very thin difference between the two. They're almost identical. Chad Amar, according to one opinion, Emas Hanochri Alehem, which means the following, that the Yisrael Gabbai who's entering into the house in order to collect for the mas, he's very afraid of the Nachri who would have him punished if he didn't look throughout the house. And therefore they have to touch all the kalim, otherwise they're afraid of being punished by the Nach. Apparently, this Nachri is a Nachri Chashuv. He has a certain position, and he could condemn the Jew for not behaving properly and living up to his responsibility as a collector of mas, and he could have the Jew punished. Chad Omar Emas Malchus Aleim. Whoa, this is even more nerve-wracking, because anybody, even if he's not a Nachri Chashuv, but he may tell the Malchus, this Jew who you've appointed and he's representing the government as a tax collector, he's not living up to his job. So the Gemara says, "My beinayu ikibeinayu Nachri Cheno Chashuv." According to the first opinion, Amos Nachri Aleim, that's only with a Nachri Chashuv. And because he's afraid of the Nachri Chashuv, that might punish him if he doesn't look carefully, therefore, he's very nervous. But if it's a Nachri Cheno Chashuv, then he's not Choshesh. He's not afraid of a Nachri Cheno Chashuv. Therefore, he's believed to say that he didn't touch the Kelim. But according to the other opinion, that we're worried about Malchus, Emas Malchus Aleim, even if the Nachri is not Chashuv, he may be Malshin. He might tattletale to the government, to the authorities, let's get this Jew, let's nail him up, right? Let's tell the government that he's not living up to his responsibility. And therefore, the Jewish Gabbai would not be believed because he's afraid of the Malchus. The Mishnah says, and even these Ganovim are believed to say we didn't touch the inside of the Kalim. For a minute, I'll ask you, Kash, on our Mishnah, from what we learned in Masechet Taris, Haganovim shenichnasu toch habayis eino tomei ela makom drisas raglei Haganovim. There's a certain room, and we know that the Ganovim entered into that room, and that's where they stole what they stole. The Kalim in that room are Tmeim, and apparently, how much more so, the Kalim that were actually in the hands of the Ganov, that were stolen from the Ganov. And we don't believe the Ganovim to say that they're Tahorim. So what do we do with our Mishnah? Our Mishnah says we can believe the Ganovim. Amar Pinchas Mishmei Derav. Our Mishnah is talking about a case Kshasu Tshuva. Why are they returning the Kalim that they stole? Because they're in the process of Tshuva. And therefore, we assume they're not lying when they say that there was no Tumah, that they weren't Mitami the Kalim. And Dekar Nami, to Katani, it says Shechzirus HaKalim. Why would they return the Kalim unless they were doing Tshuva? Shma Mina, therefore they believed on Taras HaKalim only in an event that they did Tshuva. The Mishnah says, "B'Yushalayim ne'monim ami oretz ala kodesh." Tana, we learned in the Brayso ne'monim. We're talking about Kadorim ami oretz in Yerushalayim are believed to establish the Tara of Klicheres Gasim, even these very large pottery kalim. I don't know how much more so on Dakim. But that's only for Shimush B'Kodesh, like Kodesh. The Kolkach Lama, why do you believe them on Taras Klicheres and Dafka again in Yerushalayim? So our answer is Shein Osim Kivchonos B'Yushalayim. They don't take lime and burn it in order to prepare Klicheres in Yerushalayim. There were takanos that we want to protect the beauty and avoid pollution in Yerushalayim. So therefore, we don't allow the preparation of Klicheres in Yerushalayim with the bellows and the furnace and all that. Because of the smoke that goes up from the furnaces. Rashi adds another element to the equation. In Bava Kama, Rashi says, Choshu Shema Yachshir Es Chomas Ha'ir. They may blacken the beautiful wall around the city. So therefore, kalim are very rare. Eino mitzuyim dai tzarech. We don't have enough kalim in Yerushalayim because in Yerushalayim they didn't allow the manufacture of kalim. So any kalim had to be imported from outside Yerushalayim. And therefore the Rabbanan were lenient and they didn't institute the Gzeira of Tumah when these kalim were manufactured by Ami Aretz in Yerushalayim. The Mishnah says, "B'shas haregel," we believe the Ami Aretz achal hatruma minani mili. The Gemara wants to know what's the source for this din, this kula of Am Mishnah to allow and rely on the credibility of the Ami Aretz to be mitayar the kalim even for truma b'shas haregel. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi the Amakra, the pasuk says in the story of Pilegesh Begiva in Shoftim Perek Chaf, Vayasef Kol Yisrael El Ha'ir Ki Ish Echad Chaverit. Now it's all of the people agreed to go out to battle. It was a unanimous agreement. And as a result of the fact that Nesfu Kol Yisrael Yachad HaKosav Asan Kulam Chaverim, the Torah considers all of them as Chaverim, as Talmidei Chacham that are not Ami Aretz. And we derive from this that Kol Zman Yisrael Nesafim, when the Jewish people are gathered, assembled in one place, then they're all considered Chaverim. And therefore, in Regel, when the Jewish people gather together, they gravitate to form one community. Even the Ami Aretz are considered like Chaverim, and therefore they're not Mitam. And this leads us to the Mishnah on the bottom half of Chavav Amud Aleph. Now, in the previous Mishnah, we learned about Shas HaRegel, and the Ami Aretz is believed on Tara. And now this Mishnah is going to address Ochlin Umashtin that was sold on the Regel and came in contact with the Ami Aretz. And we start with a Chaver. Haposeach es chaviso. He opens up a barrel of wine to sell his wine. And now we have another case, Ve hamaskil beisaso. It means he began selling his dough piecemeal in Yerushalayim. Al gav haregel, and all this was for tzarchei haregel, yayin for shtiyas yayin, and isa to make lots of loaves of bread, and to accommodate all those who came to Yerushalayim for the regel. And many people would buy the wine, and some of them were Ami Aretz. And you know, when you try something out and you want to know whether to buy it or not, very often you lift it up, like you check out the bottle of wine. It's Rabbi Yehuda Omer Yigmar, v'chacham Omer lo Yigmar. Question is whether you can sell this wine. According to Rabbi Yehuda, Yigmar means he's a permitted Rashoyehu lahamshich limchar scharaso lechaverim l'chol adam. In other words, despite the fact that he was a poseach es chaviso or maskil bisoso, he began already the process of selling it. He's allowed to continue to sell it, all his merchandise, to chaverim, to anyone, and it's all b'cheskes tara. And this will apply even if the entire regel, the 7 days of Yontif, will pass before he finishes everything that he has, all his merchandise for sale. And if we won't be matir this, then he's not going to be willing to sell anything at the time of the regel. He doesn't want to take a loss. And if he won't sell his merchandise, then there won't be mazon, there won't be food that's accessible for the Olei Regolim. So we have to make a takana that he's allowed to sell his schora to chaverim, to anyone, becheskes tara, until he concludes all his schora. He sold all his schora. We're not going to allow him to sell anymore because of tumas ha'ma'aretz, which is chalam afreya, retroactively on anything that he came in contact with during the course of the regel. And only during the regel we made them and upgraded them to the status of chaverim. And therefore, asur lechaver limchar dvar tameh. Yosef Rabbi Ami Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha Akila. Kila is a special room, right? Sort of like when you enter into the house, the Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, the house was owned by Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. Pasach Chad v'Yomar, one of the two, either Rabbi Ami or Rabbi Yitzchak, opened up, and he said that since Chachamim prohibited against Rabbi Yehuda to be Gomer Limkars Chachavis, or the Isa, is Yesh Listapek Maushi Anichena L'Regel Acher. Can he put it under lock and key so they'll sell it a year down the line, Becheskes Tara? Because during the regal period, we say that the Magai, Mama Oretz, is Becheskes Tara. So if it wasn't sold this year, Becheskes Tara, can we hold off till next year and sell it next year during the regal time, Becheskes Tara? On Malay Idach, again, we don't know how to identify the other person, but he said to him, Hariyad Hakol Mishamchin Shimba. When people come to buy things, then they lift them up in their hands and they contract tumah, they transmit tumah because of Magam Haaretz. V'yat Amrit Yanichenu L'Regel Acher. And you want to argue that all this merchandise can be left for a year to sell it the following year or the following regel? Malay, so the other one says to him, we don't know who it is, Atu adha idna lav mishalshim mashmishim ba. He asks him rhetorically, until now, for example, in the first regel, is yada kol mashmishim ba. And yet you were matir per regel. You can't deny that yada kol mashmishim ba. And yet he's allowed to sell it during the regel. So why shouldn't they be matir on the next regel? So the other one said to him, Hachi hashta. You should follow the following distinction. Up until this period of time, when we talk about Tumas Hamaretz per regel on the regel itself, Rachmana Tira. Because, as we said earlier, Kol Yisrael Nikraim Bo Chaverim during the regel, all Jews are considered Chaverim, Elahashta. But now, after the regel is passed already, Tmeahi, the Chavis, this barrel of wine, is Tmeah L'Mafreya retroactively, and a Chaver is not allowed to sell a Dover Tomei. So the Gemara says, Lema Kitanoi. Perhaps this whole question is dependent upon the Machlokes Tanoi. The Tani Chada, we have one brisa with regard to Chavis or Isa, and they began to sell it during the regel, Yanichenu L'Regel Acher. He's allowed to store it for the next regel, and he'll sell it for regel Acher. The Tanya Idach, but we have another brisa that says, Lo Yanichenu L'Regel Acher. He's not allowed to leave it for the next regel. My love Tanoi, shouldn't we therefore assume that this whole issue is a machlokes Tanoi? which means that according to the Chachamim, are you allowed to sell from the Chavis on the next regel, b'cheska shitara? Lo, says the Gemara. The Gemara rejects this. Hadik Tani, the Bryce in which it says Yani Chena, holds like Rabbi Yehuda, that you're allowed to be gomer and sell whatever's in the chavis, even after the regel. So therefore, he's allowed to leave it deliberately till after the regel. But the brisa that says lo yanichenu, that's kirabanan, and the rabbanan in our Mishnah hold that liachar regel also limkar me'achavis me'achar shechal of tumal mafreya. And according to the sheet of the rabbanan, you're not allowed lanicha l'regel acher. So the Gemara asks v'tizra, is this really so? That when the Brisa says Yanichena, it reflects the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Yigmar Ka'amar. In our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda is the one who says that he could continue selling from the Chavis even after the Regel. And from the Brisa, it implies that only during the Regel are we allowed to sell it. That which it says in the Brisa, lo yanichena ki Rabbi Yehuda, for hadik tani yanichena ki Rabbanan, means even according to the Shita of the Chachamim, you're not allowed to be gomer liachar regel, but you're allowed to be niach l'regel abba. Umay lo yanichena, and what does it mean lo yanichena? She'ein tzarich lanicha. Just means that he doesn't have to postpone it until the next regel. He's allowed to sell it right now after the regel. And this leads us to the third Mishnah on Chavav. We've already clarified that during the regel, the Rabbanan lifted their decree, their gzera of Tumah Sama Oretz. But after the regel, any tumah that he contracted is l'mafreya tameh. Now we have a Mishnah that's going to explain when is it that they would retire the kli on Mikdash in a case where the Amoritz came in contact with the keli in the regel. Misha'avar regel, the day after the regel, ma'virin al taras hazara, the Kohanim take the clay migdash that would nitmu, and they bring it from place to place in order to get it into a mikvah, to be tovil in the mikvah, to be mitayar the tumah of the azara from maga ame haratzim beregel. However, if the last day of Yontif of Chag is on a Wednesday, on a Thursday, on Yom Chamishi, the Avar Regel Yom Shishi, in other words, the Regel extends to Friday, which is the day after the Regel. But lo hayu ma'virin mipnei kvod haShabbos, and the Kohanim would abstain from being ma'vir the kli migdash to be mitayar them on Friday. Mipnei kvod haShabbos, the Kohanim has to dedicate the time on Erev Shabbos for tzarchei Shabbos, and therefore ein madbilin osan until after Shabbos. It's really interesting. You know, you're talking about clay migdash and you want to be mitayar them and be tovel them, but we cannot interfere with the time that he needs on Erev Shabbos for Kavod Shabbos. We see that Kavod Shabbos is a very, very heavyweight mitzvah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, however, af lo b'yom chamishi, af lo, what does af lo mean? Lo yu kodim avirin al taras hazora, after the regel passed, the Yom HaChamishi, if Yontif ends on Wednesday, and the regel by Thursday has passed already, and the Kohanim would not be Mavir Tara on that Thursday. She'ena Kohanim Pnuyim, they're not free on that day to be Matil Kalim. This is not the appropriate time for Tvilas Kalim. They would wait till after Shabbos. Now, we don't know exactly why the Kohanim are not free and available for Tvilas Kalim. The Gemara is going to have to explain this. Tana, we learned in a Brisa, the reason why Rabbi Yehuda holds Ein Mavir in Altaras Hazor B'Yom HaChamishi Mipnei She'ein HaKohanim Pnuyim L'Hotzi B'Deshen. The Kohanim were not free with a lot of time on their hands to be Matil Klei HaMikdash because they were Tarud on the day after the Chag with Hotzoas HaDeshen. That's called Efer Sreifas HaKarbanos. And this Efer was Mitztaber Kol Yimei HaChag on the Mizbech, and now they have to dedicate themselves to be Tarud to clean out all of these ashes. And that leads us to the fourth Mishnah on this daf. What does it mean that they were mitar the Azara? And the Mishnah explains, Madilin es hakelim chari b'migdash. They put all the kelim in the migdash into a mikvah. Now he writes here in the footnote, Hatam shetzrichu lahatbil es klei migdash. Why did they require Tvila of Klei HaMikdash? Mipnei Safek Tumas Mashkin. So we're talking about Mashkin that went into these Kalim that were Tamid, that might have been Tamid. Is Kates Amavir, and again, Altaras Azara Matbilin Es Kol HaKalim Shai B'Mikdash. The Omrim Lahem L'Kohanim. And they spoke to the Kohanim who were Amei Haaretz on the regel itself. And what did they say to them?